I did want to touch back on related to the volume. For a long time, it was like, okay, we had like the Schoenfeld study and some other studies showing that with increased volume, it had increased results. The
Right.
study that was kind of seen as going against that was one big one was the Barbalho study. So obviously right now there's
Yeah.
been this whole thing on Barbalho, and for people who don't know, basically Greg Nuckols and a couple other people have basically come out and said, there's a lot of fishy stuff going on in that lab, that they think the data
Yep.
might be fabricated, that this guy is putting out so many papers. It just, a lot of these things don't make sense. And I know you've
Yes.
referenced the Barballo study quite a bit. So maybe you could
Yeah.
touch on that topic.
Um, right. So Barbalho is a group out of, I want to say, Brazil, and they've cranked out a ton of studies, men, women on volume. They did the hip thrust versus squat study and a bunch of others. And early on, it looked like they were really showing that, taken to complete failure, that low volumes were not only as good, but possibly superior to
Mhm.
higher volumes. 5 or 6 months ago, I want to say, they actually retracted a study they'd done in men. And at the time, they stated that an after the fact analysis looked like one of the graduate students had maybe not done their due diligence and maybe just typed in some numbers to save time. So that one was already retracted.
Mhm.
And I would note, like, because I reported on all these on my website. And if you go look at those original articles, they're still up, but I mentioned that that one was specifically retracted. Like, I don't believe in making content on my site disappear because it's suddenly
Yeah.
gone south. But so it's important, but I did make that. I go, look, this has been retracted until something is, till they explain what happened. Don't consider it valid data anymore. So this monster paper got written, and it was something like improbable patterns in the data of Barbalho. And there's a whole bunch of people on it who did what is a mind shearing statistical analysis. Don't don't even try to read it. And I'm not saying
I
because it's
did try.
bad. I'm not saying because I disagree with it. I'm saying that you will not follow a word of it. I sure as hell didn't. Greg Nuckols wrote on an article on his website that was a more reader friendly version, not
Mhm.
by much, right? What you're getting these, like, it was a data analysis that I just can't even. Well, I didn't like statistics, and I would be the first one to admit I'm terrible at them. So it's one of those things that I don't even have the capacity to read it and say whether it's right or not.
Yeah.
I am willing to take at face value that it is, genuinely. Like, regardless of any personal drama I have with these individuals, I
Yeah.
very much find it difficult to believe that they would have spent apparently 6 months on this, looking at this data in such intense detail and be full of it, right? So I
Yeah.
do accept it. I really just genuinely do accept it at face value. And there's some other, and I don't disagree with them in a sense. They brought up some points regarding, how is this small lab out of Brazil cranking out these extremely involved, extremely long studies? Some were 6 months long, like 4 or 5 a year,
Right.
right? Most labs can only come out with a big study once a year. How are they getting the funding, which is something I discussed with a friend in private messages. But more importantly, when they did this really, like I said, insanely detailed analysis, all the data looked a little too similar to
Yeah.
itself, right? Scientific data is noisy, especially in humans. Now, random tangent, my mentor was a materials engineer. He studied rocks for the government. He thought exercise science was hilarious because when you're studying rocks, the variance between two of the same rock is like that.
Yeah.
And when you're studying humans, you can see a tenfold variation between any two people and it is noisy, noisy, noisy data. And all of the data in Barbalho and all was just a little too consistent, not only within any given study, but between the studies, that it almost looked like the data was being copy and pasted.
Mm.
And there was a whole bunch of other stuff. There was one thing in their paper, and it was like, there are too many even numbers compared to odd numbers. And like I said, at this point, my eyes glaze over and I go play PlayStation. I
Right.
couldn't follow there are these graphic grids in there. Like I said, I accept it at face value. You don't go to this much trouble. And I mean, on the one hand, I am disappointed because I, not just, and people go, oh, it's because it agreed with you. And like, well, I mean, I would be lying. It presented it seemed very well controlled, seemed very well done. Of course it disappoints me when scientific data, and they also, let me make it real clear. They did not accuse Barbalho of anything. They didn't say they fabricated it.
Right.
Very, 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 not gentle, but fair in their language. And they basically just said, we've done this analysis. We're not saying you're lying. We're not saying you made it up. We are saying that we find this data across these 5 or 6 studies to be improbable, not impossible. And so, like, again, let me make, again, whatever personal beef I have with these people, this paper was written extremely well in as much as the 12 words as I could actually understand of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they go, we want these things addressed. And apparently they have reached out to the lab. They have not gotten a whole lot back. And I would also note that Barbalho's group has a number of researchers, and I won't give the names because I'll get them wrong. One of them who worked with Barbalho's group, actually his name is on the paper. Mm-hmm. So he, and it's not uncommon
on the paper with Greg?
Yeah. I want to say it's James Steele, but don't swear me to that. And I would hate to misrepresent somebody. Whereas another researcher was approached and chose not to put his name. And I'm not saying that means anything, but it's very common for labs to work together, and frequently there will be a researcher who's not part of the lab doing data analysis or helping to write. So it is telling to me that when one of the researchers who worked on that with that lab, who presumably wants that data to be good, is willing to put their name on a paper going, there might be some issue. That is telling to me. It also shows a degree of intellectual honesty that I certainly respect. And they had a little timeline, and they're like, we reached out to Barbalho and all to sort of explain this, and realize that their timeline, like, they reached out to them like 2 days before the paper was published. So the fact that they had not given any sort of response at that point, however, we're now a month later, I haven't heard anything one way or the other as an update. But at this point, I have I have updated all of the pages on my site discussing that data, explaining that this happened, explaining that I no longer consider the data valid until such time as they can demonstrate that it was. It might not. If I'm honest, I don't think the odds are in their favor. I think they would have a very difficult time explaining how the data across roughly 5 or 6 studies was damn near identical with such little variance between individuals. It's not impossible. It's improbable. And again, it is. And I always wonder about stuff like this. Dude, why? Why go to, I do researcher groupies? Like, can you be at the bar, like, hey baby, just published my 6th paper this year. Like, I don't get it. I don't get why you would go to this much trouble to allegedly or potentially fake data. I don't understand why.
I think in theory, the idea is to get more publications out, right?
I guess, and I guess that gets you funding. I guess that gets you tenure, but I don't know. It's like when I've known pathological liars, and I'm like, dude, the energy you put into maintaining these lies, you could actually go accomplish something real. I knew one 20 years ago. The effort he put into maintaining his layers of lies, he could have actually gone and done something and accomplished something. So I'm disappointed as much just because I believe in science. I believe in research. And for a group to do something like this, I just find really disheartening. I just find it really upsetting that, so like I said, in the current time, and at some point I will go re-update my volume series whenever I get around to actually writing. I will not be including that data. Like I said, I've taken it, all my pages on the site go currently this paper, and I've got links to not only the original paper, but also to Greg's reader-friendly version, and reader-friendly will very much depend on your statistical background. This is where things currently stand. At the time, I cannot support that this data set is accurate, and so I've kind of removed it from the picture because I think that's the only reasonable thing to do.
Does it make you change your view at all as far as a stance on volume, or is your main argument still basically that you think these high volume studies just have kind of bullshit training?
Well, yeah, and actually, so there are actually two new studies that I think are worth discussing. That in that regards that I will add to my series whenever I get around to it, because again, you do start to see that, right? You start to see commonalities between the studies, right? And in science, you build a model out of the entire research base, right? You don't get to pick and choose studies. I still think Rodelli is a trash fire, neither here nor there. People can agree with me or not. Until someone can explain to me how calisthenics built more muscle than weight training, I don't consider their results particularly valid. Until someone can explain to me why beginners needed 37 sets for triceps to get growth, that one I'm throwing out. Like I said, you can agree with me or not. The others I'm all considering, including Brad's, which I still think statistics support the middle group, whatever. But when you start to look at it, so here's two new papers. All right, the first one was by Brigado et al. They compared, let's see, 16 to 24 to 32 weekly sets per muscle group. Okay. Right? They did the same workouts for either however many sets per workout to get those numbers. And supposedly they found that the higher volumes did generate more growth. Here's one of the workouts. This is in the highest volume group. So here was and they did an upper lower, just fine. They picked reasonable exercises, bench press, dumbbell fly, cable triceps. Okay, so during the highest volume group, bench press, 8 sets of 8 to 10 rep maximum on 1 minute. And they define this as concentric muscle failure, I think. Let me make absolutely sure of that. All sets were conducted to the point of momentary concentric muscular failure. Can't do another rep, no matter how hard you push. 8 by 10 RM on a minute, followed by dumbbell flat fly, 8 by 8 to 10 RM on a minute. Bullshit.
Yeah.
This was followed by cable triceps, parallel back squat, 8 by 8 to 10 RM to concentric muscular failure on a minute, followed by leg extension, 8 by 8 to 10 RM on a minute, twice a week. Bullshit. Show me the human. You will, if you took a set of squats to failure, true failure, not what people think is failure, you won't get off the floor in a minute, much less do it 7 more times.
Sure.
So anybody listening to this, I'll make the same challenge I made 2 years ago to 0 response. You think I'm wrong, send me the video. Send me a single shot, no edit, no cut video of you doing the workout. Put it on the website. I'll say I'm full of it. Send you whatever book you want. Been waiting for 2 years, and I've yet to get the video because it is not a physically possible workout. Now, when you take the average semi-trained person, they were trained, and tell them what people think is failure is not failure. Right? A paper I looked at in a different article on frequency. They let people choose when to stop the set. Volitional muscular failure. When I wanted to stop. You've got to be joking. That is not a controlled study. But that's when people quit, and especially in a squat. The cardiovascular strain of this, by the end of maybe, okay, you know what, maybe you get through 2 sets. You're not getting off the floor. You're not. And if you think this workout is possible, even the low volume group, 4 by 8 to 10 RM on a minute. By set 3, either you've had to drop the weight by 50%, or, like I said, I don't think you'll get under the bar. And if we weren't in Coronaville, I'd be happy to invite anyone down to Austin, and I'll take you through the workout, and I'll prove it to you. Because I can drop anybody in 2 sets tops, and that's with a rest period. So this workout, I don't care what their results were. I don't believe this workout for a second. I don't think anyone listening to this believes this workout for a second. Now,
it seems like this is a very common problem with all these studies. Like, these protocols, like you said, it's 8 sets, 1 minute rest. It's like people don't really work out like that. I mean,
Well,
I understand
no.
proof of concept, but
Now, see, here I will disagree. Back in the 80s, that is how everybody trained, but nobody went to failure. They were doing all this sort of semi-pump train. If you go back and watch some of the early Arnold videos and Lou and stuff, and they trained
yeah, or like Vince
higher
Giron
reps
had
for
like
short reps,
8x8 and
but
stuff.
they would never do. They were 3 to 4 reps off of failure, and they
Right.
just made it up with sheer volume and let steroids do the work. Yeah, all subjects reported a rating of perceived exertion of 9 to 5.10 for all sets. Show me the workout. Show me that you didn't have to drop the weight by 50%. There is also the fact that they used ultrasound, which is fine. Surprisingly, the word blind or blinded doesn't show up anywhere in the paper. Convenient. Okay, so that's one paper that came out. And in their discussion, when they're looking at other data studies on the topic, they cite exactly one other paper. Guess who? The only paper they cite to compare their data to is Schoenfeld. They ignore every other paper that disagrees with them. That is not how you write a good discussion. All right, so that was Brigado et al. Anyone wants to look it up? High resistance training volume enhances muscle thickness in resistance trained men. Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. It was earlier, 2019. Like I said, go check me and make sure I'm not misrepresenting things. All right, here's another paper that came out by Kubo, Keitaro Kubo. It came out of Tokyo. Effects of 4, 8, and 12 repetition maximum resistance training protocols on muscle volume and strength. So they looked at, they either, what was their total volumes? They ended up doing, I want to say, well, 4, 8, no, hang on. Is this the paper that I wanted? I might be looking at the wrong one. I'm looking at the wrong paper. Nope, what is it? Here it is. Daniel Aube, A-U-B-E et al., Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, Progressive Resistance Training Volume, Effects on Muscle Thickness, Mass, and Strength Adaptations in Trained Individuals. They compared, let's see, 12, 18, and 24 sets per week, which is good because it's about time someone compared a more reasonable range, right? Brad studied like 9, 27, 45. What is happening? And I'm not, other papers do this too, but I'm like, okay, 9 to 27 is what's happening at 18? What's happening at 20, right? So finally they did sort of a nice middle range. During the workout, muscle thickness, be ultrasound, and the same two researchers performed all of the pre-training and post-training measurements and were blinded to the experimental groups. Funny that. The workout, so day 1, back squat, 3 sets of 6 to 8, 4 sets of 6 to 8, 6 by 6 to 8. Leg press, 3, 5, 6, glute ham raise, 2 by, which is a little bit weird. So they were doing sets of 6 to 8, and let's see. The intensity of the lift was set at 2 reps in reserve until the last set, which performed a concentric failure. A 2 minutes between sets and 3 minutes between exercises was used. So this is actually like a reasonable quality training, right? That allowed a 2-minute rest interval. If you're doing a set of squats to 2 reps in reserve, 2 minutes is probably reasonable, right? And then you go all out on the final set, which is awful. Take 3 minutes, leg press, do it again. Also, they used sort of a heavy light. Day 1 was sets of 6 to 8. Day 2 was sets of 12 to 15. So kind of a little bit of a range. And they also only tested legs. And the long and the short of it was that, where did it go? Our findings also support that differences in weekly set number did not impact muscle thickness and fat-free mass adaptations in subjects who can squat more than twice their body mass. So basically, like from memory, the 18 set group did a little bit better than the 12, but the 24 set wasn't any better. So basically, we have these 2 new papers. One used a high volume, short rest, impossible workout. And again, if you disagree with me, send me the video and I'll put it on my website and whatever you want me to do, run around my neighborhood naked saying I'm wrong. And I'm not, I won't hold my breath. Can't be done. Then you have this other one using blinded ultrasound in more highly trained individuals using a more quality workout, and the volumes seem to be moderate. And if you start to look at them, you've got the bulk of the studies that found moderate volumes, Ostrowski, Hazelgraves, the 2 GVT studies. Then you've got the high volume studies, which is, the paper Mike was on, the Brigado thing, which is hilarious, Brad's paper, which is still 8 to 12 RM on 90 seconds, even to form failure. Like, you're telling me a semi-trained college student is going to take squats to form failure? By set 2, they're going to be falling apart. These aren't elite Japanese Olympic lifters. And you see that, okay, when it's heavy and quality, moderate volumes work fine. And when it's essentially what I consider an impossible or low quality workout, Mike's training is possible. It's just useless. You could do repeat sets of 10 on a 10-minute break all day long until you got bored. Not to mention those guys were in the weight room 2 hours, piss-assing around, doing these low intensity sets, right? Or, and I actually, and finally, to sort of sum this up, and now I've given away whatever I'm going to put in my article. So how do we rationalize these beyond me saying this is real training and this is pansy training, which is whatever. Sorry, low quality training, because I think that's what it is. I think if you stay 4 reps away from failure, you can probably go on a minute, but why?
All right.
So another weird little paper came out that I don't think I'll be able. Don't think I'll find it immediately. Let me see if I can get this right. So, God, I won't get it right. Was it a low load training? Essentially what it did is it had someone, they were their own controls. Like one leg did like 3 sets to failure. Then the other leg worked not to failure. Was it a low? I wish I could remember where it was. But they work matched it, right? Basically like, okay, this leg to failure did such and such tonnage, such and such volume load. We're going to have the other leg go sub-maximally. Maybe it was a rest interval thing.
This wasn't that long ago, right?
No, it wasn't. I'm really annoyed that I can't remember what it was and why
I know the study you're talking about.
Why it's not on my volume folder, because I'm disorganized. That was the
might be able to. I'm gonna look while you're looking.
But the long and then they reversed it, right? Then they were like, okay, we're gonna match work volume. It was even more than that. Like first they didn't match work volume to the failure group, and that didn't cause the same amount of. But basically, when they matched the work volume for the submaximal group to the failure group, growth was the same. Aha! Volume is the primary driver of growth. Well, no, because there's still progressive overload is in there. But here was the take-home message to me. The lower intensity group, the non-failure group, had to do 50% more sets. They had to do, the heavy group did 3 sets to failure. The submax group did 4.5 sets to get the same volume load. And then they reversed it. They did the 3 sets submaximally, and then did
Damas?
the other. Is it? Probably. He's done all kinds of stuff. Maybe that is my volume. Hang on.
Or Lacerda.
Oh, good lord.
Lacerda et al. Was 2020.
It's real recent.
Yeah, the Damas was 2019, but the Damas had high frequency and low frequency versus the one leg versus the other.
This was a volume study.
Then there was Lacerda failure versus non-failure, one leg.
That's it. Let me pull that up. Is performing repetitions to failure less important than volume for muscle hypertrophy and strength? So yeah, they did muscular failure or non-muscular failure. Both protocols, 3 to 4 sets, 3 minutes rest, blah 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 blah. And like I said, so they matched volume load of the non-failure to the failure and found that as long as you match volume load, growth is the same, but they had to do 50% more sets. So it's 3 sets to failure. To match that, you had to do 4.5 sets of submaximal training. And I think that starts to build a useful model to make all these papers fit, right? If Ostrowski shows that, whatever it was, 14 sets, gives the same growth as 12 or whatever the numbers were, I've forgotten now, or the others, the Kubo study, I think it's, no, the AUB study, which was like, 12, 18, and 24 are basically the same. And let's say I think the 18 was a little bit better, but don't swear me to that. It's like, okay, well, you can do 18 quality sets. And I bet if they go on to failure on all 3 sets, it would have been even lower. That's what Ostrowski did. Or you can do 24 sets with 4 reps. Boom. Suddenly, the papers aren't as contradictory as they seem. Because again, 8 by 10 RM on 1 minute is not quality training. You're going to be falling apart by the end. I don't care, but they're going to failure. Yeah, by the second set, you've cut the weight by 50% to even have a chance of getting to the same repetition range. Having a chance to get there. Or the lifters were going to most people stop, especially on squats, when they're tired, not when they're to failure, right? And I will, again, anybody listening to this, feel free to prove me wrong. This is what a set of squats to concentric failure looks like. Doing your repetitions, slower, grinder, you descend, you either get stapled in the bottom and dump the bar on the pins, or you reverse, get stuck in the middle, no matter how hard you push, and either have a spotter help you to the top or dump the bar on the safety pins. Anybody listening to this, how many of you ever done it? How many of you ever seen anybody do? I don't mean missing a single or having something go awry. How many of you have ever seen a single human being in the gym squat to that level? Unless you happen to be in my gym 20 years ago when I was more truly a maniac. I bet 0 or close to it. Go online and look up some of the videos of people squatting to true limit failure. You're not doing that for multiple sets of 10. If you think failure is 3 reps before, which is where most people, they'll stop when it gets hard, then yeah. And I think that is what explains these differences in results.
Yeah.
You have to do 50% more sets. At least. It might be more or less when you get to higher. Like this is only 3 versus 4 and 5. Who knows? By the time you get to 8 sets and your quality on a 1 minute rest is falling completely down the toilet, who knows how many of those low volume low quality sets you need to equivalent, is that a word? To be equivalent to the quality work.
Yeah.
So suddenly 12 sets becomes 18 when you're, going in and stopping 3 reps short of failure. 18 becomes 24, 20 becomes 30. Suddenly it all starts to make sense. And I think that's what explains it.
I think that makes a lot of sense. There's one other topic I just wanted to bring up. It's a nutritionally related topic. And so I don't get on Facebook too much, but I saw this in your group and
probably for the best.
Either we genuinely disagree here, or maybe it's just a misinterpretation. So somebody had posted something about is there any problem with this method? And they were like, 2,000, 2,000, 5,000, 2,000, 6,000. And I know one of your responses was like 6,000. Like, why would anybody do that? And I was thinking, so Steve Lowe in your group, the physician.
Yep.
So he and I talk quite a bit, and one of the methods that he uses to stay, I wouldn't say contest lean, but quite lean, pretty much year round at this point, is he will do 3 low days followed by a high day. So that's maybe 1,800, 1,800, 1,800, 4,500. And he just does that. I mean, he's done that for, I think, a couple of years now. Right now that I'm finished my diet, I'm experimenting with something similar. About twice a week, I'm eating maybe around 5,000, and the other days are closer to about 2,000. That's maintaining about 185 pounds. And even in some of your books, now these are dieting books like UD2, Keto book. I mean, you have certainly days where these refeeds could easily approach 6,000 or 7,000 calories. So now again, I've even seen you, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, talk about UD2 in the past for maintenance or slow gains. So in all of these examples, Steve, myself, even some of your own books, there are examples where you're hitting quite high refeeds. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that, because you seem pretty against it in the thread.
Well, and some of that may have just been the way he described it seemed very strange, where he was having these monster calorie days. UD2 is very specific in that when you're carb loading, when you are completely glycogen depleted, you are going to absolutely staggering calorie intakes for like a 24-hour span. But that's specifically to refill muscle glycogen and requires a metric pile of training. Because even then, if you look at then on Saturday, you may be finishing the carb load up a little bit, but it's 10% surplus. And then on Sunday, same sort of thing. So it's basically this weird little cycle to refill muscle glycogen. And then, at that point, you're at a very moderate deficit or moderate surplus because you don't really need that much. Because what he was describing for people who have con was basically he was like, okay, I want to do low calorie days, then on training days, do like 6,000 calories. And a lot of his reasoning was so he could eat a bunch of junk food, which is not necessarily bad reasoning. The issue, I think, is that it's not on any individual day, that's simply not required for muscle growth.
Sure.
And unless you're coming into it depleted, which depends on your training volume, I don't know if I see the justification. And again, he didn't provide enough context without knowing more what training is doing. There are probably possibilities. Actually, the consultation, God, how long has it been? 6 weeks ago, and just guy I was talking to, he's just found that for him, keto for him is adherence. And he can either do all the carbs or none of the carbs. I'm the same way. So we were talking about once he gets to his goals, how to maintain. And what we did actually work with something very similar. All right, just stay keto, controlled calories 5 days a week, and then put 2 high carb days, carb load days, whatever, but not ridiculous. Like, I just don't see the purpose of having it that high in calories. And again, for that specific thread, I know what you're talking about, probably needed more context for it, but it seemed like his number. Well, so, what's this? I don't think he gave his body weight and things of that nature. If you're doing a lot of glycogen depleting exercise, the body can soak up a lot of calories in the short term. So, I think I was just giving sort of a snap response, and I know, and those threads always go completely off the rail.
It's always different online.
It's not as bad as the squat technique threads, but that's a whole separate thing. That brings out the worst. But so like, yes, and also there was someone else. Oh, I did another consult, and an individual, really good dieter, when they were on their diet. And they were like, here's the thing, on the weekends, can't do this. But during the week, and like normally I would say maintenance, have every day at maintenance calories. However, for this person, they're like, my weekends are just a free-for-all. And I was like, all right, cool. 5 days, we're just going to keep you low carb, low calorie. That way you basically are just accommodating your own preferences. And certainly, again, for those in that situation, and actually what I told, because they were having trouble, they're like, okay, if I go crazy on the entire weekend, that offsets all my gains. I said, well, just make it 6 days of dieting. Just make Saturday your free for. Just like you can, I found this years ago with Body Opus, right? Like, because my carb loads turned into crap loads very quickly. Like, a dozen donuts to start the morning. Over 48 hours, I would just regain the lost fat. But over 24 hours, man, the body can handle. I don't know why. I don't know. The body
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the examples I was going to say is I don't recommend this. And so I had a coach back in college who, wasn't the most intelligent guy, but I made great progress. And again, I don't recommend this, but literally every Saturday, this was like to bulk up, every Saturday, all out cheat day. The guy had like a bunch of clients on a forum. They would brag about their massive cheat days. That was Saturday. Sunday was like 1,000 calories. Monday through Friday, low 2,000s. Dude, I put 100 pounds on my deadlift that year. I probably gained about 8 pounds of like legitimate lean body mass, like after I'd cut and bulked. So again, especially if you have any history of an eating disorder, I don't recommend that. You gotta be careful with that sort of thing. But I am less and less inclined over time to believe that it really matters your daily calories, and you're more looking at the big picture of like over the week, and you can get to the extreme where it's problematic.
To a degree, I agree with that. There is a point I think you reach that you may end up just in balance. Like you do too, is a very, like, it sort of uses a trick, because when you're glycogen depleted, your body, all the carbs go into your muscle and you actually keep burning fat, but it's for exactly 24 hours, right? You've got a single day time span to get away with this. And if you do it, and that's, like I said, think about Thanksgiving. People go nuts. And the body can just kind of soak it up acutely. And that's what I had told this person. I was like, all right, cool. For dieting, let's just make Sunday a diet day. And then when you reach your goal, because they were like, I can't do maintenance. So like if I if I turn off the diet switch during the week, I will regain it all. I was like, okay, I wouldn't normally recommend this, but just keep and during the week, they're at work. They have a very strict schedule, structure. Weekend, not so much. I said, cool. Well, when you move to maintenance, just make Sunday a normal day and you'll have 5. Would I recommend that to most people? Not necessarily, but in this case, it was, I wasn't going to square peg round hole it and try to force them into something that they had already shown what could. And I mean, this person, talk about thorough. You know, they were like, I've done it all. I've gone to a nutritionist. I've done CBT. I've done the work. It doesn't matter. This for me is just a non-starter with my food intake. Once I start, I can't stop. I was like, cool, we'll just work within. So yeah, I do think in specific contexts,
there's something to be said for that 2 days too, because I've noticed that with my my 2018 diet, and like you said, one day you can get by with a lot. That's, I think, one of the reasons that this refeed method at least seems to be working well. Now that I'm done dieting, my metabolism's kind of like normalized and everything. I'll have a 5,000 calorie day, but within 2 or 3 days, I can have like I've baselined in my weight and I'm good for another one. But when I've had it before where I was at like, peak dieting, one day, fine. 2 days, just, man, like that second day, because like you said, glycogen, refilling, increased NEAT, thermic effective food, it's enough to kind of be like, all right, maybe you gained a little fat, but not that much. But man, throw in a second day in there and you've got to do some serious damage control.
Yeah. Or you have to be much more meticulous, right? That's UD2. You got the one double maintenance day.
Yes.
But on the next day, you have to go back to like maintenance plus a little bit, which is very difficult for people. So yeah, it is weird. Like there is something going on. And then of course, for maintenance, 2 days might be just fine if keeping, at which point you're almost into, an intermittent caloric restriction without being at quite the extremes. Like rather than being, 25% in maintenance, you're like, all right, I'll just. And this gets into something I think we talked about without getting too far into the weeds, is that maintenance is really hard. Maintenance is way harder than anything else, right? Like losing fat is a goal and gaining is a goal, and maintenance is just weird, nebulous, gray, kind of thing. And there's that psychological switch. It's like, all right, this is a diet day. I can do this. This is an all-you-can-eat day. I can do this. This is a maintenance day. It's totally. So for some people, doing it that way, may end up working a lot better. Like you said, if you've got an eating disorder or whatever, absolutely don't go down that route, because you will just end up in a binge purge. You will put yourself right back where you were. And it's different to do whatever 10% below maintenance, lock it down a little bit, and then have a big day versus that kind of extreme where you're binge purging. There's something else I was going to say about. I don't remember if we talked about refeeds with somebody, and I know there's a pro. It just kind of goes to this. There was a pro bodybuilder. I don't remember who. Regardless, he kind of opined. He was like, "Look, I've tried it. I've tried flexible eating, tried refeeds, tried diet breaks. They're not for me." And he based this and realized that none of those things were ever mandatory for diet. People got in shape without them. People, of course, more people fell off the edge than not, but they were never mandatory. They were strategies to help. And even in my most myopic, I don't think I ever thought they were required. They were simply beneficial. But for him, he found, probably through experience, and also realized contest dieting, you were going to a goal that you stay at for maybe 12 hours, right? This isn't like long-term dieting. This isn't dieting to maintain. So it's just different. But for him, once he flipped that diet switch, it was better for him to never flip it off and do a maintenance day to do it. And for some people, that is, even in an acute sense, that once you start eating, you just start eating, and it's very difficult to eat at maintenance. So in that case, sure. And certainly if you're going to do that, did I lose you? Is it, certainly if you're going to go down that, well, actually I want to go back, something you mentioned about your deadlift. I remember talking to people about refeeds and UD2 and a while back, and I generally recommended, put the refeed on the training day. After training, blah, 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 glycogen storage, recovery, yada, yada, yada. And some powerlifters go, well, what about putting it the day before so that I'm big and strong and full for my heavy workout? And I was like, yeah, that's legitimate, right? I mean, even the UD2 powerlifting version was like, yeah, you carb load on Friday, go in, make Saturday a damn max out day because you will be strong and full and heavy and all of that. So like, both are legitimate, but I think in a maintenance standpoint, like, that's probably what was happening with your deadlift day. You went in feeling strong as hell, and were able to probably make gains like.
I might be an anomaly there. I have never been one to find that acute changes in diet affect me too much. Yes.
Really? Okay. I caught enough of that. It was basically like, well, nobody else will have heard a word of it. I heard some of it, which is basically like acute changes, no big difference, 3 day, like big carb loads, so and so, bulking, definitely, dieting long term kind of hurts things. And I think some of that is probably like coming out of UD2, like usually that was in a diet context, right? It's like, okay, I'm a little depleted, my body weight's down, especially for max lifts, those small changes in hydration and body mass really make a big difference. Like in a deadlift, especially, if your body weight's down, the bar moves you instead of you moving the bar. Like when it gets really heavy, because you're so things of that. I think was more in that context. Also with higher volumes of training, but even so certainly for some people. So yeah, to kind of wrap up, it can have validity. I think in that particular thread, like I said, I was just kind of making it. The 5,000-6,000 calories a couple times a week seemed excessive because the body just can't synthesize muscle that fast. I think it's probably more beneficial for maintenance, big picture, even some of the cyclical dieting type stuff. And if you remember, Hatfield had his reverse cyclical diet, where you went big for 5 days and then low for 2 days. Mm-hmm. To try to kind of offset some of this. Or I've seen other people where it's like, eat Monday through Saturday, train Monday through Friday, Sunday, make that a low calorie day, just to sort of offset some of the fat gains. But that's no fun. Just GFH and tell everybody you're a powerlifter.
Right. All right. Well, before I lose you again, let's wrap up and figure out where can people find your stuff, man.
As always, website bodyrecomposition.com. That can get you to the store. For anybody who wants to prattle at me privately, I am doing online consultations now. Not coaching. Let me make that real clear. I'm not doing month-to-month coaching yet. Okay. Don't have the energy for it. These are just like individual consults. My Facebook group, bodyrecomposition.com, still easiest place to find me. Extremely active group, lots of smart people. There is this guy Dave Mangione who chimes in sometimes, and don't really think. Running joke for anyone listening to this. I don't know how many of you even know who Chuck Mangione is. He was
probably very few people.
Probably very few. He's got very what did he play? Flugelhorn? Something like that. He was a trumpet player back in the day, and he's got one particular track that King of the Hill made. And my running joke, since I always seem to get Dave's name wrong, is I call him Dave Mangione in my group because, one of us thinks I'm funny. So anyway, yeah, my Facebook, bodyrecomposition.com, best place to find me.
Awesome. Thanks, bud.
Always.